Is the media responsible for Islamophobia in the U.S.? Throughout the last few years, hate against Muslims has grown, and so has Islamophobia, the fear of Muslims and the Muslim religion in general. I decided to focus on this topic as it seemed to be at the forefront of the recent campaign of now President Trump's election. But it seemed like every other week there was a story on a Muslim attack and the media, which led me to my research question, which is the media responsible for Islamophobia in the U.S.? First, I wanted to discuss the problem specifically, and then discuss how the media has influenced the spread of Islamophobia. According to a report done by the FBI, from 2015 to 2016, hate crimes against Muslims rose by 19%. We're in this graph right here. And as well as the assaults by anti-Muslims assaults exceeded the 2001 total after 9/11. And according to a poll done by Gallup, 35% of Westerners believe Muslims in their respective countries are treated unfairly, and 34% were unsure of whether or not they were treated fairly. Throughout all this, the media has been at the forefront of choosing which stories to tell and keeping the public's perception of reality limited. This brings me to my stance on my research question. I believe the media, I believe one of the main causes of Islamophobia is directly impacted by the media. The media has become this through three different aspects of their reporting, these being otherization, oversaturation, and negative association. The first of these I'll be talking about is otherization. Otherization is the act of making one group into a collective other. It also creates a separation, an us versus them mentality, and eventually leads to some sort of superiority or fear of that other. In this case, it's an us versus them, or West versus East, or Christian versus Muslim, and then eventually leads to, because of this negative, putting positive elements on the whoever is us, and then negative elements on the them. It creates a sense of superiority, and then also a fear of that other, which can lead to the hate crimes I mentioned earlier. So this is happened by the media either consciously or unconsciously pushing the idea that all Muslims are terrorists or extremists, which has created them as a collective other in media. Even in movies or video games, when a terrorist is introduced, it is almost always a Muslim individual. So this creates a collective other rather than a group of complex individuals, where you can see in these articles here, it's why they hate us, as in putting the group all together, instead of saying this is a complex group and not just all of them as one. In a book called Mediating the Mediated Image of Islam, F.A. Noor states that images of Muslims are always as murderous fanatics, abound in movies, videos, and computer games. The next is oversaturation in the media. In a study by LexisNexis academic and CNN, it was found that there was a 449% more coverage of Muslim attacks than non-Muslim attacks. Others may argue that while they may receive more coverage, not all of this coverage is necessarily bashing on Muslims specifically, and just reporting on the attack in general. But however, just putting it out there disproportionately, it unconsciously becomes a given that Muslims are violent or are terrorists. Muslim attacks take up the majority of newspapers and news agencies nowadays. It's hard to look through a newspaper or a news website without seeing something about a Muslim extremist or an attack by a Muslim group. This creates a society where Muslims are viewed as only perpetrators of violence and nothing else. And as seen from statistics before, this is clearly not the case. The last is negative association. Many news agencies, whether consciously or unconsciously, associate Muslims with terrorism, as I said before. In this quote from a research paper, it said, or from a journal, it said, Sihar Sadllah research found that association of Islam with terror, violence, and oppression of women contribute to a process of racialized governmentality at airports, which conveys the message that American Muslims are a threat to national security and require careful monitoring and surveillance. So as I said, negative association in media or can create an even racism or Islamophobia at an even higher level, where this was saying racialized governmentality at airports, which was random security checks, and it just, as I said, like this negative association conveys an idea that all Muslims are a threat. So another form of negative association comes from associating the burqa or the veil or the hijab with a patriarchal society or with women having a lack of agency. In an interview with Leila Abu Lugad, an activist for women's rights in the Middle East, she discussed how the perception of Muslim women wearing burqas having a lack of agency is misinformed. Because many of these women choose to wear a veil or burqa, her argument was that, as with most things, wearing a burqa or veil was much more complex than just agency. It is important to realize the complexity of every situation and people group and not to make broad and general assumptions. In conclusion, I believe that the media has been a main cause of Islamophobia in the U.S. In order to combat this issue, it is important to first make a commitment to balanced journalism. News agencies need to make sure they are reporting events equally and not over-reporting one group, as it has been the case with Islam and terrorism. And this will help to remedy the otherization and negative association produced by the media. Another solution is for Muslims to fully embrace and to be public about the preachings of Sufism, which is the Muslim teaching to grow closer to God and move away from moral defects. The idea behind this is Muslims seek God and they will never be able to be seen as murderous. However, I disagree with this solution because it puts the responsibility on the Muslims who weren't even the cause of the problem in the first place. However, this solution could work if it were the media that promoted this idea and not the Islamic community itself. Thank you for listening.
Okay, Ellis, the question I want to ask you is, how did you assess the credibility of the sources that you used for this project?
Well, like we did kind of in the beginning of the year, we used like the CRAP test, but I would go through each of my sources. Just a lot of them, as you saw, were like from Gallup, which I already kind of knew was a credible source, just because they're always putting out like really in-depth polls and different things like that. But for a few others, it was more like looking into what is this author related to, what other work has this author put out, and like, has it been well received? Has there been any scrutiny behind it? And so it was more about just digging deeper into specifically what they had, what other things that they'd written, and I would also see if they had written something specifically to Islamophobia or Islam in general. Then I would know that that's probably a credible source for me because they have expertise in that field.
My next question is, if you were to take your research if you were to continue your research, where would you go next?
Right. Okay. I think I would expand. I kept media kind of within the confines of journalism and news, but I think I would try to expand more into how more like film and TV and video games kind of affect that as well. And just because I feel like that was in the paper and in the presentation that was way too broad, but if I had more time or more resources, I think that would be something that would be interesting to learn about.